So now let's move on to the feature presentation. And that is Nicola and me talking about giving our talk called From Fork to Forest. And it's about why we can't solve the climate crisis without changing how we eat. And there'll be time for discussion at the end. So let's just start I'm going to start by giving you a challenge question. What percent of the mammal mass on Earth is wild? And I would love to have you unmute yourself and just make your guesses. Like, nobody's expected to know the answer to this. This is just kind of setting the stage. Anybody want to be brave and make a guess?
20%.
20%. Yeah, that's a good guess, right? I mean, nobody really knows. Okay, well, it turns out the answer is just 4%. So humans make up about a third of the mammalian biomass on Earth, and our livestock makes up just under 2/3. So that leaves just 4% for wild mammals. And then when you cut out ocean mammals like whales and dolphins, we're down to just 2%. So all those elephants and deer and hippos, their mass pales in comparison to the weight of our cows and pigs. And it's a similar story for birds. Over 70% of avian biomass is farmed poultry. Our meat and dairy habit is gobbling up land, causing the extinction of wild animals, contributing to climate change, and squandering resources. Half of US land is dedicated to animal agriculture. It's our food habits that are the major cause of species extinction and a huge contributor to climate change. All right, so now time for some introductions. I'm Anna Larsson. I think I know almost everybody on this call, maybe everybody. I've been a member of Climate Reality for a few years, and I'm currently a co-chair of our local chapter. I'm also a member of other climate and environmental organizations, and I'm a mom of 2 teenagers, and I work in the business world. And I've always been an environmentalist, and I'm also an animal lover. And I became vegetarian when I was 13. And about 15 years ago, I became completely plant-based, which means I stopped eating all animal-derived products, including dairy and eggs. And as I've done more research on the food we eat, I became aware of the connections between animal agriculture and environmental degradation, including climate change. And I wondered, I'm an environmentalist. I pay attention. I read the newsletters. I sign the petitions. Why didn't I know about this? Why isn't anyone talking about this? So this talk is my way of sharing some of what I've learned.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Nicola Philpott. I just recently became more active in this chapter of Climate Reality. For the past 8 years, I've been a group leader of my local chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. So I've been a climate activist for about 9 years, and I have found that eating less meat has been the easiest, cheapest, and one of the most effective climate actions that I've taken. It also aligns with my values of treading lightly. When I found out that it takes 4 times as much land to feed a person that eats meat versus a person that eats only plants, it felt pretty clear to me that I should switch to plant-rich eating. And if most of us made this switch, then it would free up a lot of land so we'd be able to plant more trees, reforest, rewild, and increase our biodiversity. So what we're going to do this evening is Anna's going to talk about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and then I'll give some straightforward tips on eating less meat and more plants.
Great. Thanks, Nicola. So this talk is about fighting climate change, and I know that many of us do things to help with that fight. Things like driving electric vehicles or using solar and wind power, and even installing heat pumps for more efficient heating and cooling. And all those things are great, and we need to be using them all. And in this presentation, we're going to make the case for why you should become a reducitarian. You need to eat less animal products, a lot less, to help fight climate change. And we aren't talking about Meatless Monday levels of reduction. That's not going to cut it. The Lancet is the British equivalent of the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's a respected, thoroughly peer-reviewed scientific journal. And a few years ago, they commissioned a report to determine how humans should be eating for healthy bodies and a healthy planet. And their study, the Eat Lancet report, found that Americans are eating over 6 times our fair share of meat for a healthy planet. So that means that Meatless Monday won't cut it. And instead, we'll have to flip it to Meaty Monday and make that the only day all week that you're eating meat. And you don't have to change your life and become vegan. Reducing your meat consumption and leaving the occasional animal-based food in your diet is a huge help. I'm not trying to take away your bacon or your cheese Danish or your cheese curds or whatever it is that you love. I'm just saying, keep the animal products you really love in your diet and try substituting new things for the animal foods that you're just eating out of habit. So try swapping out the chicken breast on your salad for chickpeas, for example. And a great thing to know is that you won't be alone in making this change. In the last 5 years, 30% of Americans have begun reducing their meat consumption to fight climate change. So now let's start by talking about the climate impact of our diet, that is, its greenhouse gas impact. If we electrify everything and completely eliminate fossil fuel use right now, today, without changing how we feed ourselves, we'll still have over 2 degrees Celsius of warming. In order to meet our climate goals, we've got to change how we eat. And while we are focusing while we're focused on the fossil fuel industry, it turns out that is only 2/3 of our problem. The other third of climate change is associated with how we eat. So agriculture accounts for about a quarter of direct global emissions, and animal agriculture accounts for more than half of that. And while we are figuring out ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from other sectors, think of developments like electric vehicles or renewable energy production. Our food production system is stubbornly hard to impact. The emissions just keep going up. If everyone were to adopt a plant-rich, low animal product, reducitarian way of eating, we could cut our emissions from the food sector in half. And this isn't enough to get us all the way to where we need to be, but it's the biggest lever we can pull in the food system. So keep reducing your food waste, but to have the biggest impact on emissions from your food habits, cut way back on your consumption of animal-based foods. So here's another challenge question. If you compare the amount of CO2 released for each pound used, how greenhouse gas intensive is a pound of beef compared to a pound of coal? So please unmute yourself, somebody bold, and just make a guess. And again, I don't expect anyone to know the right answer. I'm just looking for some wild guess.
Okay, how about
Anyone?
the beef is 3 times as much?
3 times as much. Thanks, Arnie. Yeah, that's a reasonable guess, right? It turns out a pound of beef is 40 times worse than a pound of coal. And it's not just about beef. A pound of shrimp costs us 10 times more carbon than coal, and cheese is 9 times. Pork and chicken are 4 or 5 times. So can you imagine that? Your family's chicken dinner is the equivalent of burning 5 or 10 pounds of dirty coal. And by comparison, a pound of lowly dried peas, another great protein source, creates just 1/3 the emissions of coal. All in, animal agriculture accounts for about 20% of greenhouse gas emissions, and cow burps make up half the climate impact of beef, for example, and land use is the other half of the problem. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. But the total climate impact of our food includes deforestation, soil degradation, manure management, fertilizer for feed crops, and then there's also the machinery, food processing, transportation, and refrigeration that happens along the life cycle chain. And now let's talk about land use and its impact on the carbon in our atmosphere. About half of what is now grazing land was forest in the year 1800, and the percent is higher the further back in time you go. So it's not fair to say that animals are just grazing on land that we wouldn't be using for anything else anyway. forests soak up about a quarter of the carbon that we emit. And that's why deforestation is such a disaster for the climate. It's causing more emissions now when we cut down the trees and burn the undergrowth, and it's stopping those trees from absorbing more emissions in the future. Ultimately, what we need to do is leave the earth alone to do its thing and absorb carbon. Earlier, we talked about some of the ways that we are reducing our carbon footprint, switching to electric vehicles or installing rooftop solar, for example. If you're taking steps to reduce your personal carbon footprint, eating much less meat and dairy should be high on your list of actions. So please reduce your flights, never ever take a flight to outer space, switch to an EV, and install rooftop solar if it's in your budget. But for goodness sake, eat less meat. And the great news about reducing your animal product consumption is that you can start doing it today. You don't have to wait for a permit or a contract or a shipment to arrive. And another point worth remembering is that if you live with other people, switching your whole household to reducitarian will have 2 or 3 or 4 times this impact. And that really adds up. And now let's move on from climate change and carbon dioxide emissions and discuss other ways that animal agriculture is damaging the earth. All right, time for another question. Again, just a crazy guess. What percentage of the grains grown in the US do you think is for direct human consumption? Does anyone want to be bold and make a guess?
20%,
20,
10%.
10 to 20%. Thanks, Lorraine. I appreciate your being brave here. Yeah, and that actually was a very good guess. It turns out in the US, less than 10% of all the grains grown are used for direct human consumption. Most of the grains we grow are used to feed animals. So those amber waves of grain, they're for government subsidized chicken feed. If we stopped eating so many animals, we could grow a lot less grain and be able to return the excess farmland to nature. And on top of this, the monocultures and associated chemicals used to cultivate the enormous amounts of animal feed we require are hurting the planet in other ways. So among other things, it's leading to a decline in our insect populations. Insect levels have declined 70% since 1990. There we go. And now let's talk about deforestation. You won't be surprised to learn that cattle ranching is the biggest cause of deforestation in the Amazon. 75% of Brazil's deforestation is driven by cattle ranching. And this meat gets exported all over the world. And in the US, big agriculture has made it illegal to require a country of origin label on meat. So you won't know if you're buying beef from deforested land. But the US imports over 1 billion pounds of beef from Brazil annually. So chances are good that if you know someone who eats beef, you know someone who has contributed to the destruction of the Amazon. And now let's talk about water use. Beef uses a lot of water. How many daily showers equal the water used to create a 1/4 pound hamburger? Just 1 1/4 pounder. Any guesses? I'm not going to cold call.
3 showers.
3 showers. Thank you, Jason. That is an excellent guess. It turns out it is 6 weeks of showers that equals the amount of water needed to produce a 1/4 pound hamburger. And that's not even a big hamburger by American standards. Make it a double, add some special sauce, put a couple of slices of cheese on it, and you're approaching 6 months of showers. And I should point out, it's not that farm animals are incredibly thirsty. Most of the water that's used is used to grow the crops that feed the animals. So like in this picture, often the feed crops are grown in areas that need to be heavily irrigated. Half of the water that's needed to support an American's lifestyle is used for meat and dairy. So whatever steps you take at home to conserve water pale in comparison to the amount of fresh water in 1 meal's worth of meat. And let's zoom into what's going on in Minnesota to talk about water pollution, or water pollution, as I like to call it. We have 50 million farm animals in Minnesota. They're mostly in CAFOs. Those are confined animal feeding operations or intensive factory farms. We have 2 million cows and 9 million pigs and lots of chickens and turkeys. And a cow makes 25 times the poop of a human, and a pig produces 10 times the waste of a human. In Minnesota, our farm animals create as much manure as almost 100 million people. And have you ever heard of a sewer for animal waste? No, that's not a thing. Animal waste is stored in lagoons, like the purple ponds in this picture, and sprayed on fields. But the land can't absorb such an intense amount of nutrients, and the excess ends up running off into streams and rivers and polluting the water table below ground. And I'd like to give you a sense of scale. In Minnesota, the current law says that you can open up a factory farm with up to 1,000 cattle as a matter of course. Any farmer can do it on their land. You don't need a special permit. And it doesn't matter if the farm next to you is already doing it and the farm next to them too. The size of the lagoon needed to accommodate the waste from that number of animals is the equivalent to 3.5 football fields. So now picture this, 3.5 football fields covered in cow waste. That's pretty gross, right? But wait, there's one more thing. That lagoon needs to be 18 feet deep. That is what is needed for 1,000 cattle. But remember, we have 2 million cattle. So we have 2,000 of these lagoons scattered around the state just for cows. And then the pigs in the state require about twice that number of lagoons. And then we have the waste from chickens and turkeys too. The amount of animal waste we're talking about from factory farms in Minnesota alone blows your mind. And it's not just Minnesota. In Iowa, 2/3 of the lakes, streams, and rivers are impaired from all of this animal waste. And in some lakes in Iowa, people can't even go kayaking because they'll get skin infections from the polluted water splashing on them. And in Indiana, one especially large dairy farm produces as much waste each day as all the humans in Austin, Texas. And in Michigan, one family realized that that the factory farms within a 3-mile radius of their home produced as much waste in a day as the entire city of Chicago. So coming back to Minnesota, you may have heard about the unsafe drinking water in the driftless part of our state in southeastern Minnesota. And this is due to the very high amount of nitrogen coming from intensive animal agriculture in that region. And this is a problem that exists throughout the state because those factory farms and crop monocultures are everywhere. 96% of farming counties in Minnesota have nitrogen runoff above recommended levels, making their drinking water unsafe. Almost every single farming county in our state has unsafe drinking water. And the pollution doesn't stop at our borders. Excess nutrients change the ecology of rivers, causing mass fish die-offs. And when the polluted river meets the ocean, the excess nutrients cause massive algae blooms that kill ocean life. And I want to be clear, I don't blame our farmers. I blame our ever more powerful industrial agriculture system. Farmers are beholden to the enormous power that these companies have. Farmers feel like they can't farm the way they want to and the way they had generations before. The current industrial agriculture system demands farmers participate in intensive animal agriculture. And now we'll leave the land and look at our oceans. We're emptying our oceans at an alarming rate. So here's another challenge question for the brave. What portion of large ocean fish that we had 100 years ago do you think we have today? Any guesses? And you're not supposed to know the answer, so it's okay to make a guess.
20%.
20%. All right. Thank you, Jason. Thanks for being bold. So the answer is a third. We have about a third. So not as bad as 20%. And if you're thinking, Oh, a third. That's not so bad. I've been listening to some of these other numbers. A third is actually, we're doing okay. I want you to think of a stadium. It's a sold out show. Every seat is taken. It's vibrant and lively, and everyone's having a good time. And then 2/3 of the people disappear. Now look around. Your nearest neighbor is 3 seats down. That stadium is a pretty sad and lonely place. It's no longer so full of life. This is the state of our oceans today. And then there's ocean pollution. You've probably heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. 80% of it is made up of fishing nets and other garbage from commercial fishing and aquaculture. So the point here is that you can't avoid damaging the earth by switching from eating land animals to eating sea animals. So there you have it. We've made our case for why you need to eat a lot less animal-based food. I have not seen a single credible climate scientist who says, yeah, we can keep eating as much meat as we always have. The earth can handle it. That study doesn't exist. And I hope you're now thinking about what changes you can make to your own diet to make it more earth friendly. And if you're like many people, this feels like a big ask. You might be wondering if you can negotiate this a little bit. Just make some minor changes at the margin. How about if I just... So let's go into that. What about if I just eat grass-fed meat and dairy? I need to tell you, there just isn't enough land on the planet to feed our current appetite for meat if this is how we raise it. If all American beef were raised with grass-fed methods, it would take more land than we have in the entire United States. And that's just for beef. The math for switching to grass-fed or regenerative farming, but not changing the quantity we eat, just doesn't work out. Regenerative agriculture does hold some promise for sequestering carbon, but the animals raised on the typical regenerative farm actually produce more CO2 than the farm sequesters, making them a net drag on our carbon budget. Project Drawdown has said that restoring ecosystems and rewilding land has a much larger carbon storage potential than regenerative agriculture. And do you know what else? In the US, our per capita consumption of meat has increased 60% since 1961. And even since the year 2000, our per capita meat consumption has increased 25%. And I bet many of you can remember the year 2000. It wasn't that long ago. We just keep upping our consumption of meat, and our planet is suffering for it. So if you're going to eat meat, then go ahead and get your meat from a regenerative farm, but make sure you reduce your consumption of animal products by a lot. Please understand that eating regeneratively farmed meat and dairy doesn't give you a free pass to keep eating animal products at the rate Americans are accustomed to. What about if I just go vegetarian? Eliminating meat, but keeping dairy in the picture certainly helps. But remember that cows are a big emitter of methane. In Minnesota, for example, 90% of our methane emissions come from cattle. Plus, there are the water and poop issues that we've already discussed. So here's an example. It takes about 630 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. And to help you picture that, imagine the Fauché Tower in downtown Minneapolis. And I know it's not as big skyscraper by modern standards. In fact, it even looks kind of stubby. But still, you wouldn't want to have to climb up all those stairs to get to the top of it. So a stack of 630 1-gallon jugs of water would be taller than the Fauché Tower. That is how much water is needed to produce 1 gallon of milk. And remember a few years ago when the water shortage in California caused restaurants to only serve tap water on request? They were better off just taking Greek yogurt off of store shelves. If your morning just wouldn't be complete without cream in your coffee, don't sweat that little bit of dairy. Just understand that cutting out meat but adding in more cheese and yogurt is of limited benefit. It's important to remember that eating fewer animal products doesn't have to be all or nothing. Going reducitarian is just fine. So many respected scientific journals have published studies saying that we're eating way too many animal products for a healthy planet. We all need to cut down on our meat consumption, way more than just meatless Mondays. Instead, we need to aim for meat eat Mondays, 1 day a week of eating meat. And now I'll hand over to Nicola, who will lead a discussion about how you can start eating more plants.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to talk about how I moved from eating meat every day to eating all plants. So when I first became concerned about the climate crisis, I rushed out and I bought a share of my local community solar garden to provide the electricity for my home. And I went to DC to advocate for effective climate legislation with Citizens Climate Lobby. And I organized a solar array at my kids' school. And I went vegan. And then since then, I've bought an electric vehicle, an induction stove, and a heat pump to heat and cool my home. And you should do all these things. We should all do these things if it's in our budget. But they all cost money. And what I've found is that of all the actions that climate actions that I've taken, transitioning to plant-rich eating has been the easiest, cheapest, and one of the most effective climate actions that I've taken. And so my journey, despite what Anna said about Meatless Mondays, it did start with Meatless Mondays. And when I first suggested Meatless Mondays to my husband, he said, sure, I'd be happy to eat a salad once a week on a Monday night. And I just thought that just isn't really appealing to me. If I eat salad for dinner, I'm hungry a couple of hours later and I'm eating lots of snacks. And so instead of eating salads every Monday night, I decided to look at the recipes that I was already using. And one of those things was a chicken curry. And I simply switched the chicken for chickpeas. And so every Monday night we're having some kind of chickpea curry. And this was so easy that it soon expanded to include a mixed bean chili every Thursday night and tofu stir fry every Saturday night. And so with these three simple switches, my husband and I have halved the amount of meat that we're eating. But we don't live in isolation. We have extended family. They come over for dinner. We have friends and they come over for dinner. And most of those people eat meat to some extent. When they come over in the summer, for example, we have grill outs and we're making Impossible burgers and Beyond sausages, lots of grilled vegetables, potato salad, fruit salad, things like that. And all the food is plant-based and everyone really likes the food. We also have a couple of kids and they are teenagers now, and famously teenagers eat a lot. So it's really important that I make food that they like. And so I'm making things like a lentil shepherd's pie, sloppy joes, minestrone stew, black bean burritos, curried tofu, things like that. And I've put some of our family favorite recipes in the chat for you to try. And I want to encourage you to find your own family favorites. Go to websites and do your own exploring and try things out yourself. So I'm a big fan of cookbooks. These are some of my favorites and also some of Anna's favorites. So having said that, initially we made some very simple switches to increase the plants and reduce the meat in our diet. It's really worth looking at what vegan chefs are doing because they really know how to make food tasty, delicious, and satisfying. I looked at transitioning to plant-based eating as a kind of adventure, trying new foods and new techniques in the kitchen and new recipes. It's helped me to think about food quite broadly and think about food from around the world. So instead of thinking about meat as the centerpiece of the meal and vegetables as kind of secondary around that centerpiece, I'm making foods from around the world. So I'm making lots of stews and casseroles, pasta bakes, stir fries, curries, things like that. And many of these kinds of recipes, they don't contain meat in the first place, but if they do, they're a small component and it's very easy to switch out the meat and replace it with a bean, legume, chickpea, tofu, something like that without, sacrificing any of the flavor. So many of these meat alternatives, whether it's the sort of fake meat that you can get in the grocery store now, or just a legume or chickpea or tofu, something like that, they're high in protein. But it turns out we don't need a lot of protein for a healthy diet. We only need 0.36 grams per pound of our body weight. That's about 50 grams or 2 ounces of protein a day. Protein is in all of the food, all of the plants, fruit, vegetables, grains that we eat. As long as you eat a balance and different vegetables, plants, then you get a whole range of amino acids and you can satisfy your amino acid needs. And I don't worry about the amount of protein that I'm eating or my kids are eating. I know we're getting enough. Something we might want to think a bit more about is the amount of fiber that we're consuming, because it turns out that more than 90% of us don't consume enough fiber for a healthy diet. And fiber is only in plants. So you need to eat your fruit and veg and grains if you want to get enough fiber. And there is no fiber in animal products. Okay, next slide. I'm going to finish off, because I talked about Simpsons already, and I talked about empowering youth, which I usually talk about in this talk, but I mentioned those earlier. This is my last slide for today. I want to talk about community, because if we're making any changes in life, it's much easier if there are people around us that are doing the same thing or that have done it before. And the point I want to make here is that there are lots of people out there like us that want to reduce the amount of animal products that we're eating, and that want to increase the plants that they're eating. And that can be for a whole variety of reasons. It's often for health reasons or ethical reasons, for climate or environmental reasons, or social justice reasons. And so there are loads of plant-based vegan events throughout the Twin Cities metro area. I actually organize a potluck that at Unmapped Brewing Company in Minnetonka, and you're all welcome to attend. It's free. I actually reserve the whole of a coffee shop area because that's closed at the brewery. And once a month we gather there, we share food, we share recipes, and it's a really sort of warm, friendly, non-judgmental environment, and anyone can come along and you can get ideas, recipes, and try some delicious food. Also, you can join the Plant-Rich Diets Action Team, and we can share plant-rich food at our upcoming gathering in December. If you're interested, if you want some recipe ideas, then reach out to me and I can help with that. But I'm sure you can find your own if you just browse the internet. Okay, so I'm going to hand back to Anna, and she's going to talk about how you can be an ally.
Great, thanks, Nicola. And I second the invitation to the talking about the potlucks and how delicious the food is. You'll get to try all kinds of delicious new things. All right, so this isn't just about you and your personal consumption. We need to rapidly transition to a world where eating meat and dairy 2 or 3 times a day is not the norm. And here are some things you can do beyond your own kitchen. Talk to people about why you're reducing your consumption of animal products. Share some of the information from this presentation that you find compelling. Just like other aspects of fighting climate change, talking to others about the problems with our current systems and habits brings them into public consciousness and opens the door for change to occur. And let your elected representatives know that this issue matters to you, and lend your voice to the campaigns of others. Big Ag receives billions in subsidies each year. You can bet that they're fighting hard to keep that government money flowing. So sign those petitions and write those letters. And support plant-based initiatives for school lunches, for hospital meals, in your office or church. You don't have to do it all, but advocate in the places that matter to you and support others who are leading the charge elsewhere. And finally, order plant-based menu options in restaurants. Restaurants and our dining companions need to know about the choices we're making and why. And a nice thing you may discover is that many people you already know may also be making these changes. Rather than being an extremist freak, you may find that you're part of the growing reducitarian movement. There are many reasons to switch to a plant-rich diet: planetary health, your own personal health, and the ethics of how farm animals are treated. And these are just a few suggestions to get you started if you're interested in learning more. Eating more plants is not controversial. There's not a doctor in the world who will tell you that you can eat too many plants. And there's not an environmentalist in the world who will say that we're growing too many plants for human consumption. That's not a thing. The next time you're planning your dinner or you're at the grocery store shopping for the week, I challenge you to include some meatless, fully plant-based meals in your plan. Join the 30% of Americans who have already started making this change. And start with a single step, but start. So now we'd like to hear from you. What questions do you have for us? And we'd like to hear some of the ways that you're planning to reduce your consumption of animal products, or hear what you're already doing. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing and let's talk. Great.
Tammy has
So,
asked that we share the slide deck with her.
totally, happily.
And then we could talk about iron. There was a question about what you do
Oh,
about anemia or to avoid anemia.
yeah. So I think many of us have suggestions. Nicola, do you want to start?
No, you had a suggestion
Okay.
already in the
All
chat.
right.
You can talk about
Yeah,
that. And
sure,
then
for sure.
also Jen mentioned something
Yeah,
too.
I saw that. So yeah, just in general, beans have a lot of iron. So it turns out there's actually this quirky thing that if you compare the blood iron levels of vegans and vegetarians, vegans are just fine because they often eat so many beans, and vegetarians, oddly, are actually more likely to be iron deficient because they end up getting a lot of their protein from dairy products that has no iron at all. And I think, Jen, you have some thoughts too.
Yeah, I had an illness for a time where I was iron deficient. And so I learned all about the alternatives to I mean, there's vegetable iron and hema iron. And, you know, in some cases, I suppose the hema iron is important, but your body does processes the vegetable iron just as well. And there are a lot of options, like spinach is especially high. And of course the beans. I think chickpeas are among the most iron rich beans, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe I'm speaking disinformation here, and I hate to do that if anyone's a nutritionist in the room, but that was my experience. And then just, like my daughter takes iron supplements. And yeah, so those are my thoughts, experience.
And Tammy, I don't know if you had something you wanted to add to this or if you have a new topic. Either one is fine.
Actually, I have just a tag on to that. How did you feel after switching completely to a plant-based diet? And do you think you were healthier? Did you get sick as often or not necessarily?
I definitely feel healthier. I rarely get sick now, and I also feel psychologically healthier. It really feels, yeah, I don't know whether to go into it.
You feel like you're living your authentic self, for
Yeah,
one.
yeah. And also, am I allowed to be political or not? Partisan? No? Okay, I won't go into that.
I wanted to say too, Ed, to piggyback on Nicola with your reference to like getting sick, like in terms of food poisoning and worrying about leftovers, and like meat is really gross. and it like you can't put it in your compost and like all sorts of weird stuff that is just like kind of just unhealthy in and of itself, in my opinion.
Great. All right. Lorraine?
Lorraine had a question about how many grams, how much is a gram?
Yeah, how
And
much is it?
I did write this in the chat, but there are 25 grams in 1 ounce.
And just to help you picture that, so let's see. I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, but I think they're about right. So I think it's 1 slice of whole wheat bread has about 10% of your daily protein needs. Somebody else correct me if I'm wrong, or we can quickly Google that. But it's surprising how quickly the protein adds up, not just from traditional protein-rich foods, but just from everything you eat. So if somebody else wants to talk, I will Google how much protein is in a slice of bread.
Lorraine has her hand up.
Yeah, hi. I really appreciate this. Now, I'm lactose intolerant, so I have been totally off dairy and have felt much better because of that. So that has not been a problem, and the substitutes are just so available and perfectly good. As far as the meat, I went vegetarian, though I was also eating fish, but no animal meats kind of thing. And I did become very anemic, which took a while to overcome, but I was given prescribed iron for quite a while, and that was fine. On the other hand, while I was a vegetarian, I never got sick. Other people around me would have colds, not me. I had never developed a cold. And I think it's wonderful for your health. It's just that I would have to pay attention to the iron because of possibly maybe I have absorbency problems. But my thought now, I've been starting to look at some really good soups that are available in the stores, and I can throw beans, hands full of canned beans into soup. I can chop up vegetables and throw them in. Today I did grate a little cheese into it, but that certainly wouldn't be necessary. But I think it would be probably not too easy to really reduce the amount of meat by getting something like a really good soup and throwing throwing the beans in there. So thanks for your suggestions.
I love that. I think that's a great idea.
Also the tofu
Mm.
meals, yeah. To have a day, I like that. Do you use a day of the week you have tofu and another day you have beans, or I thought you said something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It started off like that when we were doing meatless Mondays, and then we were doing meatless Mondays and Thursdays, and then it expanded to Saturdays as well. And then I just thought, I'm just going to cut it out altogether. This is pretty easy.
Yeah, by that point you could because you had so many other things to eat.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of having instead of having a meatless Monday, have meat eating Monday, and all the others are meatless. So,
Mhm.
yeah. When I was working and talking about weight control and health control, one of the things I talked about was if you're planning your meal, most of the time people say, well, what are we having for dinner tonight? Well, we're having hamburger or we're having pork chops. But suppose instead we say, well, we're going to have squash and spinach tonight. Maybe you may still have some meat, but you're changing your focus. And that's something we could all work on. Change your focus off the meat, which may or may not be there, and onto the other things and raise up their importance. So,
Oh, yeah, I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I think Tammy's up next.
Yep. So, just a clarification and actually a disclosure. Fantastic presentation. In all honesty, I was actually getting ill listening to you guys talk about this, though. But I mean, your statistics and your comps were just unbelievable. Can you go back? I just need a clarification on the grains you were talking about, that are produced as it relates to maybe water consumption, because did that exclude the percent of grains that we ship offshore to like third world countries? Does it exclude the grains that we use for ethanol, biofuels? Can you just clarify that
Oh,
number again?
that's an interesting question. Okay, so of all the grains grown in the US, my understanding is that 10% are for human consumption, whether that's in the US or overseas. And then you're right, in the US, a lot of our grains actually go to ethanol, and I think that's about 20 to 30%. And then it's still over half that's left that's fed to animals. And that animal feed is not necessarily on our shores, as we know from the recent news. Like a lot of the soybeans, which is considered a grain, get sent to places like China, or at least
Not
when
anymore.
China isn't mad at us. Yeah.
And then if I could just ask just one other question, this might be out of scope, but I'd be interested to understand what the impact of having pets is in relation to everything you just went through. Because we
Yeah.
have a lot of pets, right? I'm not going to tell you how many pets I have, but
I know we love our pets. Yes. So pets, I think they were they on? Yes,
Yeah.
they were on my list of like climate action. So I'll actually share that slide for just a second. Um, so pets are kind of two bars down below vegan. Um, and that is an average, and that includes people who feed their pets their very big dogs, a human grade raw animal product, like all meat diet. And then the other, you can go all the way back to plant-based food only, but you can see that that having pets is definitely, um, especially dogs, or yeah, a large, I suppose if you keep a, a large cat, that could also a large carnivorous cat would also have a big
Thank you,
impact.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most cats and dogs eat meat. Most people feed their dogs and cats just, regular dog and cat food, and that contains a lot of meat. I feed my dogs plant-based dog food, and they are perfectly healthy.
And yeah, and then just one more thought on the whole like pets thing. So what I haven't been able to understand from the research about pets is to what extent. So truthfully, most of the pet food is made from like the side cuts and the odd cuts and the odds and ends that's left over from the meat industry. So I don't know what impact it would really have if we stopped feeding our pets dried kibble. Maybe our meat industry would get more efficient at using those odd bits because it can't sell them to the pet food industry. But I just don't know if that's like, if this number of what was it, 0.8 tons of CO2 saved annually. I don't know if that's a real number for pets. All right, Jen, over to you.
Oh, sorry. I'll lower my hand. My question is about like vegetarian meat products, and particularly Nicola and Anna, if you use any. We eat a lot of vegetarian hot dogs and such. We have our favorite hot dogs and sausages and meat, and like yeah, the Impossible Burger is amazing. Like with the onset of more of these based meat products, like, is that anywhere in factor into your personal diets, or the presentation anywhere in terms of being good for the
Yeah.
planet?
My family eat them all the time, and my kids love them. All these fake meat products, they taste very similar to meat,
Yeah.
and I consider them healthier than meat, mainly because they don't have as much saturated fat and they don't have any cholesterol. I don't worry a lot about the processing hype.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have a lot of ingredients, and you know, we do also eat, yes, just chickpeas and tofu and things like that as well, lentils, things like that. So I don't eat fake meat every day, but we do eat them.
Yeah. We eat a lot of them, and I can definitely make, I'm sure Nicola too, but like for anyone on the fence, like they've come a really long way since the last time maybe you tried them. So worth trying again. And then we eat out a lot too. I mean, we're a busy family. We're running around, but we go to Taco Bell and get like just bean burritos, and a lot of we have our meals that we eat this place or that place, and it's all really fine. Like, I don't miss meat at all.
I agree. I don't miss it either.
It is after 8, so I'm happy. I think Nicola and I are both happy to hang around, but we won't be offended if you decide that you need to hop off and get on with your evening. So, any more discussion?
Well, let's get your hand up.
You can just, that's okay. You can just unmute yourself and jump right in. It's discussion time. Yeah, Lorraine, go on ahead.
Well, I do confess, and this would be hard to give up, would be an egg in the morning. It's just really good.
You can get the grass fed, like, like free range. That's where I make decisions. Like, we were talking in the chat about like maybe you just get the best meat from the best place and you eat way less of it and you pay tons more, but it's better.
So
Like,
if
we
I
get
got
free
pasture-raised
range.
eggs for
Yeah.
$8 a dozen
Yes.
or something.
I've been paying $8 for
$1
eggs
a
for
piece, isn't it?
20.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, this was definitely part of my journey, sort of transitioning to sort of humane meat and paying more for it. And then inevitably you just get fed up with paying so much for every meal. So half your meals turn out to be vegetarian because you don't want to spend all that money on meat every day. And so that was definitely part of my journey to vegetarian and veganism.
Yeah. And Lorraine, if you love your eggs, keep them in your diet. That's part of our message is,
Right,
don't feel guilty
rather than-
about keeping what you really love in your diet, and just be mindful about the other stuff.
Yeah, I can do that.
I'll just add that Anna and I are available for presentations to other groups. So if you want to invite us to talk at your church, we've given lots of discussions, talks at churches, other environmental groups, and also a business, a lunch and learn.
I belong to AAUW. Can I tempt you? I belong to the Minneapolis branch.
Yeah, sure. We'll talk to
Well,
anyone.
I could probably put your name in for this year. I think that it's all established, but for next year.
For
Yeah.
sure.
I don't know what that is.
American Association of University Women. It's
Oh,
nonpartisan, helps education. It's focused on promoting women's issues, education, especially. They use a lot of donations and create scholarships for
We would love to speak with them.
yeah, and we have many interests, including political outreach, environment, education, of course, and whatever. We had Dudley Riggs.
Ooh.
She had been married to him. She's now 91 and still talking all over the world via Zoom and rather than in person. But we just have a tremendous variety of speakers. And I think you guys would be really good.
Thank you. We'd love to do that.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Good. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And you know how to reach us. So thanks for attending and spread the word and have a great night. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
next month. Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.